London, November 2004. A quiet South London street. Police lights flash across a row of council flats, and a man lies dying outside a woman's home. The gunman? A record producer once celebrated by the nation, Carl Morgan, 24 years old. A rising talent, once part of the chart-topping So Solid crew. Now, a killer consumed by pride and humiliation. How could a man go from making hit records to pulling the trigger in front of children? This was not a story of self-defense or survival, it was vengeance disguised as honor. In Tooting, that day, Morgan returned to reclaim his pride with a gun. The result? One man dead, one man jailed for life, and a genre forever changed. Inside, famous British rappers who went from fame to prison. We unravel the dark intersections between music, ego, and murder. From the streets of South London to East London's estates. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where Britain's beats turn deadly, its streets whisper betrayal, and the rappers behind the fame are finally unmasked. Today, we look inside the world of UK rap gone rogue, exploring the true stories of artists whose lyrics became prophecy, from Carl Morgan's violent downfall to Crazy Titch's fatal feud, to drill stars whose fame ended in flight and murder. These are the cases that shook Britain's music culture to its core. What you're about to hear may haunt you long after the final verse fades. First offender, Carl Morgan, 24 years old. London, November 2004. In the quiet suburb of Tooting, what began as a bruised ego between two men would erupt into one of the most shocking acts of gun violence ever linked to Britain's early grime scene. Carl Morgan was just 24, a rising record producer loosely tied to the chart-topping group So Solid crew. He had appeared in the music video for their hit 21 Seconds, a symbol of South London's emerging urban identity. But behind that flash of fame hid a man consumed by humiliation, jealousy, and pride, emotions that, in a single afternoon, turned lethal. On the afternoon of November 6, 2004, Morgan was publicly beaten by Colin Scarlett, the new partner of his former girlfriend, Elisha McFarlane, the mother of his two children. The confrontation, witnessed by neighbors, left Morgan humiliated. One bystander remembered seeing his face change from pain to rage. Hours later, Morgan returned, armed with a handgun and bent on revenge. The scene that followed was described by prosecutors as a Wild West shootout in a London housing estate. Both men carried guns. Morgan fired first, sending bullets tearing through the air. Scarlett fired back, but 3 of Morgan's shots struck him in the chest. The young man fell to the ground as terrified residents rushed for cover. Children hid behind doors. Screams echoed through the estate. Scarlett, also 24, died shortly after arriving at hospital. Detectives from the Metropolitan Police Homicide Command soon uncovered what they called a planned retaliation. Ballistics experts traced the weapon to Morgan's known associates and confirmed that he had deliberately returned to the area to confront Scarlett. Investigators later revealed Morgan's chilling confidence. He believed that local witnesses would stay silent out of fear, but he was wrong. Several residents, shaken by the violence outside their homes, gave statements to police. One described it simply: "It felt like a movie, only it was happening on our doorstep." The trial opened at the Old Bailey in October 2005. In court, Morgan appeared calm, denying any involvement in the shooting. He told jurors a third gunman had fired the fatal shots. Forensic experts dismantled the claim. The bullet trajectories, they testified, could have come from only one direction: Morgan's. Judge Brian Barker, the Common Sergeant of London, told the jury that the defense was a fabrication. When the guilty verdict was delivered, Morgan's composure cracked. He stood and shouted, "I love you, Mum." His voice trembled, echoing through the courtroom, a brief glimpse of the young man behind the rage. Judge Barker then imposed a life sentence, ordering that Morgan serve a minimum of 30 years before parole. "This was a senseless act of arrogance," he said. "Gun use is the scourge of our streets. The message must be one way: it will not be tolerated." Silence filled the courtroom. In the public gallery, Colin Scarlett's mother wept quietly. Elisha McFarlane, the woman at the center of their feud, later said she dreaded the day she would have to tell her children that their father had killed their brother's father. Across Britain, headlines called it the fall of a So Solid crew producer. For a generation that saw grime music as the voice of the streets, the The story was a brutal reminder that fame offered no immunity from violence. Community leaders in South London called for stricter firearm controls and an end to the culture of postcode pride that fueled neighbourhood rivalries. 2 decades later, Carl Morgan remains imprisoned, eligible for parole no earlier than 2034, when he will be 53. His case still stands as one of the earliest intersections between UK rap culture and real-world bloodshed. Judge Barker's final words remain etched in public memory. Every bullet fired tears, not only flesh, it tears families apart. Because in the end, no victory born from revenge is ever worth the ruin it leaves behind. But Carl Morgan wasn't the only artist whose fame fell into darkness. Just 1 year later, another voice from London's grime scene, louder, angrier, and far more dangerous, would turn his own lyrics into murder. His name was Crazy Titch. Second offender, Carl Dobson, Crazy Titch, 26 years old. East London, November 2005. On a cold evening in Newham, the sound of rapid gunfire shattered the calm of a council estate, a grim echo of a feud born not on the streets but in lyrics. Carl Dobson, known to the grime world as Crazy Titch, was 26 and already infamous. A fiery performer with an unmistakable voice, he'd once been one of the faces of the underground collective Boys in Da Hood. His tracks like Sing Along made him a cult figure in the early grime movement, but behind the fame, Dobson was known for volatility. He'd spent 5 years in young offenders' institutions for robbery and violence before music gave him another chance. For a while, it seemed to work, until words, sharp, public, and humiliating, pulled him back into the world he had escaped. The spark came from a 16-year-old rapper named Shaba Shah, who released a diss track aimed at Dobson's half-brother Dirty Goods. The song accused Goods of losing touch with his roots. Within the grime scene, those words were an insult that couldn't be ignored. When Shah refused to apologize, Dobson took the feud personally. According to prosecutors, he felt his family's honor had been mocked, and pride, they said, became his weapon. On November 4, 2005, Dobson and his associate, Anthony Green, set out to find Shah and his circle. They carried 2 guns, a handgun and a Mac-10 submachine gun, moving through the Chingford Hall estate like soldiers preparing for battle. When they couldn't find Shah, they turned their attention to Richard Holmes, a 21-year-old producer and friend of the young rapper. Witnesses later recalled Holmes facing them fearlessly, telling Dobson to leave it alone. Moments later, Dobson held a pistol to his head and pulled the trigger. Holmes tried to flee, but the Mac-10 spat bullets through the night. 1 shot pierced his heart. He died before paramedics could reach him. The investigation by Metropolitan Police quickly traced the killers. A teenage fan who lived nearby recognized Dobson immediately, not as a stranger, but as the man she'd seen on television performing grime freestyles. Ballistics matched both weapons to the crime scene, and phone records placed Dobson in the area. When arrested, he denied any part in the murder, claiming mistaken identity. But prosecutors described the act as revenge, false pride, and misplaced loyalty. The trial at the Old Bailey in 2006 drew national attention. Inside the courtroom, Dobson sat expressionless, his eyes fixed ahead as witnesses relived the chaos of that night. The judge, Brian Barker, called it an operation of staggering ruthlessness and arrogance. He told the jury, "This was not music, this was murder in the name of ego." When the guilty verdict was read, Dobson showed no emotion. Green, his accomplice, looked down at the floor. Both men were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years before parole. Outside court, the victim's mother, Lynn Holmes, clutched a framed photograph of her son. "He was only trying to make music," she said quietly. "Now he'll never hear his own name again." The murder sent shockwaves through Britain's grime community. Promoters cancelled events, police warned clubs against hosting grime nights. Fans who once saw Crazy Titch as a symbol of raw talent now debated whether his songs glorified the very violence that destroyed him. Years later, while serving his sentence at HMP Long Lartin, Dobson's voice re-emerged, a phone call cameo on Stormzy's album Gang Signs and Prayer. To some, it was redemption. To others, a reminder that fame never erases consequence. As one detective later reflected, he had talent, opportunity, and recognition, but pride became his prison long before the gates closed. In the end, the case of Carl Dobson stands as a mirror to a culture that blurs art and anger, because when pride writes the lyrics and vengeance holds the gun, the song always ends in silence. If Carl Morgan's story showed how pride can destroy a man, Crazy Titch revealed how ego can infect an entire movement. But the next case takes that violence to a generation born online, where drill beats replaced grime and murder played out like a video game. This is the story of Suspect and Swavey. Third offender, Tariq Monteiro, 24 years old. London, August 2019. The summer air was heavy and restless, carrying with it the tension of a city divided by postcode rivalries. In the heart of Camden, two young men, known to millions online for their music, were about to turn their lyrics into reality. Tariq Monteiro, better known as Suspect or Sus, was 19, a rising name in the UK drill scene. He rapped about street pride, revenge, and loyalty, words that echoed through South London estates. Alongside him was Siad Mohamud, known as Swavey, 20 years old, and just as immersed in the world of drill culture. Both belonged to a group called Active GXNG, rooted in the Agar Grove estate, an area where rap, reputation, and revenge had become inseparable. On August 12, 2019, a 16-year-old named Alex Smith, once a youth footballer with dreams of playing professionally, stepped out of a Nando's restaurant near Euston Station. He was unaware that, nearby, two stolen cars were circling the streets. Inside sat Monteiro, Mohamud, and 4 others. They weren't out for music that night, they were hunting. When Alex was spotted, the cars sped towards him. Witnesses said the men jumped out like wolves chasing prey. Alex ran through Munster Square, terrified, as Monteiro, armed with a large machete-style blade, and Mohamud, in a stab vest, closed in. The attack was swift and brutal. Alex was stabbed multiple times. One wound pierced his chest, fatally damaging his heart. A resident who watched from a window recalled, "They didn't stop until he fell." The group fled, leaving Alex dying near a doorstep. Within hours, the pair were gone. Using false documents, they boarded a flight to Kenya, believing they had escaped British justice. In Camden, the community was shaken. Alex's mother, Beatrice Smith, described her son as her precious baby boy, saying through tears that he had been hunted by a pack. Police called it one of the most calculated gang attacks of the decade. For more than 2 years, Monteiro and Mohamud lived as fugitives. Monteiro even married and fathered a child while hiding in Nairobi, but the peace they sought abroad was temporary. In January 2022, after an international investigation involving the Metropolitan Police, the National Crime Agency, and Kenya's Transnational Organized Crime Unit, the two were arrested in a Nairobi apartment. Officers described the capture as a coordinated takedown that left them with nowhere to run. They were extradited to London to face trial at the Old Bailey in May 2023. Throughout the hearings, both men denied murder, showing little emotion as prosecutors outlined how they had driven through central London in stolen cars, armed and ready to kill. The prosecution described the assault as a planned and sustained hunt, while the defense offered no credible explanation for the flight to Africa. When the verdict came, the courtroom fell into silence. The jury found both men guilty of murder. Judge Mark Lucraft KC, delivering the sentence, said, "This was a brutal and cowardly attack, a young life taken for no reason other than gang hatred." Monteiro received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. Mohamud was sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years. Neither looked at the victim's family as the sentence was read. Outside the court, Beatrice Smith clutched a photograph of Alex smiling in his football kit. "He should have been safe that night," she said. Instead, they hunted him down. The case reverberated far beyond Camden. It reignited national debate over drill music and its connection to street violence, prompting renewed calls for better youth intervention and gang prevention programs. It also became a landmark in UK-Kenya extradition cooperation, proving that even across continents, justice would not be outrun. Behind bars, Monteiro and Mohamud remain symbols of how ambition twisted by ego and environment can collapse into tragedy. And as one detective later reflected, they rapped about chasing enemies, but in the end, they were the ones who couldn't escape. Because when music becomes a mirror for violence, it doesn't echo, it bleeds. Two killers on the run across continents might seem like the end of the story, but it wasn't. In East London, another group of rappers would take revenge to a new level. What started as a party for a 1-year-old ended in a public execution, and at the center of it all was KO. Fourth offender, Kammar Henry Richards, KO, 28 years old. Walthamstow, East London, August 2022. It was supposed to be a celebration, balloons, laughter, and a first birthday party at the Peterhouse Community Center. But by nightfall, the sound of children's laughter was replaced by gunfire, as a brutal gang revenge plot turned a family gathering into a scene of horror. The attack was led by Kammar Henry Richards, known in the drill scene as KO, alongside Kamani Brightly Donaldson, Joao Patekote, and Jeffrey Kammar, 4 young men whose lives had slipped from promise into violence. Henry Richards, once admired for his raw lyricism, had become consumed by loss and revenge. Their target was Khalid Samanta, a rival linked to the London Fields gang. 11 days earlier, a failed hit meant for him had injured an innocent neighbor, a humiliation that demanded retribution. On August 13th, after 2 of the men were attacked, they vowed to strike back. That evening, as families celebrated a child's first birthday in Walthamstow, the group arrived in stolen cars fitted with false plates. When they confirmed Samanta's presence, a masked gunman emerged and opened fire. The bullets missed their intended target but hit 25-year-old Casey Booth, a father of 2, as he sat in his car. 7 shots echoed through the night. 1 pierced his heart. He died instantly. Outside the community center, children screamed, parents ducked for cover, and a party meant for joy descended into chaos, another life lost to London's endless cycle of revenge. Forensics soon revealed chilling details. The same gun had been used 2 years earlier to shoot Booth's brother. The attack, prosecutors said, was a meticulously planned revenge operation, with every detail, from the stolen cars to the escape route, designed to erase evidence. The killers dismantled and disposed of the vehicles that night. Days later, Henry Richards released a drill video titled "Laughing Stock." In it, he mocked the murder, describing details not publicly known. Judge Lynn Taton KC would later call the video a grotesque display of arrogance and total lack of remorse. Detectives spent months piecing together CCTV footage, cell site data, and encrypted messages to tie each man to the conspiracy. Henry Richards' digital footprint, from surveillance cameras to studio uploads, became the backbone of the prosecution's case. When police arrested him, the once celebrated rapper was silent, his defiance replaced by resignation. At the Old Bailey, the jury heard the story of careful orchestration and escalating violence. Prosecutors described it as a joint enterprise of vengeance. Henry Richards, Brightly Donaldson, Patekote, and Kammar were all convicted of murder, conspiracy to murder, and conspiracy to possess firearms. The judge condemned the killing as a public execution carried out near children, a horrifying example of how tit-for-tat violence destroys families and communities. Henry Richards, the ringleader, received life imprisonment with a minimum of 37 years. Brightly Donaldson was sentenced to 38 years, Patekote to 37, and Kammar to 35. When the sentences were read, none spoke. Henry Richards simply stared ahead, expressionless, his hands clasped, the swagger of KO gone. Outside court, Marcia Rowe, Casey Booth's mother, wept as she addressed the press. "It wasn't just my son they took our peace, our trust, and my grandchildren's innocence." His partner, Shanice Thomas Brown, added, "Our children now understand words they should never know: death, danger, revenge." The case sent ripples far beyond East London. It reignited debate over drill music and the glorification of violence, particularly as Henry Richards' songs continued to stream online even after his conviction. When another track, C'est la vie, appeared hours after his sentencing, referencing prison life and money still coming in, public outrage grew, forcing the Ministry of Justice to intervene and demand its removal. For investigators, the Walthamstow shooting became a symbol of how digital bravado fuels real-world destruction. The gun, the lyrics, the lives, all linked in a cycle of pride and pain. In the end, the words of Judge Taton lingered. "You turned music into mourning, you glorified death and left children without fathers. Nothing about this was fame, it was failure dressed as pride." And as London continues to battle the grip of gang culture, one truth remains: when revenge writes the verse, innocence pays the price. The Walthamstow massacre exposed how drill turned vengeance into spectacle. But even before that, in the heart of East London, another young rapper was already proving that fame and violence were inseparable. His name, CB, or Cracky Blacks, and his crime would haunt the city for years. Fifth offender, Lekan Akinsoji, 25 years old. Forest Gate, East London, April 2017. It began as an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Commuters moved through the streets near Custom House Station, shopkeepers prepared for the evening rush, and a young man named Ahmed Dinjar stopped by an off-license to buy a lighter. Within minutes, his life would end violently, the victim of a feud he was never truly part of. The men who hunted him were Lekan Akinsoji and Sunjata Keita, both 19 at the time. Akinsoji, better known in the UK drill scene as CB or Cracky Blacks, had been climbing the ranks of East London's underground rap world. His lyrics spoke of loyalty, violence, and the code of the streets. In one of his tracks, he rapped, "No face, no case, no Evie." Those words, meant as swagger, would later come back to haunt him. Akinsoji was already deep in gang life, part of the Wood Grange gang, locked in a bitter rivalry with the Custom House crew. Keita, also 19, denied being part of any gang, but he was inseparable from the same circle. Together, they joined a ride-out, a slang term for a hunt, driving through enemy territory in search of rivals to attack. The car was a stolen black Mercedes. Their faces were hidden behind balaclavas. At 3:49 that afternoon, a stolen black Mercedes stopped outside BJ Wine's near Custom House Station. CCTV captured two masked men, Akinsoji and Keita, leaping from the car, chasing 21-year-old Ahmed Dinjar inside the shop. A brief struggle followed, before a knife pierced his heart. He collapsed between the aisles as glass shattered and bystanders screamed. Minutes later, the attackers fled. Hours after, the Mercedes was found burning in Epping Forest, torched to erase evidence. Arrested within 8 days, both men were released for lack of proof. The case went cold until a 2023 forensic review revealed DNA from Keita on a knife sheath and traces from the victim's hand, alongside phone data placing him in the getaway car. Recharged, both faced trial at the Old Bailey in 2024, described as a cold-blooded, unprovoked attack born from London's relentless cycle of gang warfare. Judge Anthony Leonard KC told the jury, "This was not a fight, it was an execution, planned and carried out without mercy." After just a few hours of deliberation, they returned a majority verdict, guilty of murder. When the decision was announced, Akinsoji showed no reaction. Keita lowered his head and whispered a few words to his lawyer, the only time he spoke that day. Outside court, Ahmed Dinjar's father described the verdict as a moment of relief after 8 years of torment. He thanked the officers who had refused to give up. The renewed investigation became a landmark in the use of digital forensics to solve gang-related murders, with police emphasizing that time will not protect the guilty. The case reignited debate about the UK drill scene, a genre often accused of romanticizing violence. Critics pointed to Akinsoji's lyrics, written just days before the murder, as evidence of how music had blurred into reality. Supporters countered that drill merely reflected the chaos surrounding Britain's disenfranchised youth. Now 27, both Akinsoji and Keita face life imprisonment. Their conviction closed one of East London's longest-running gang cases, but it also exposed a deeper truth. Behind every viral track and every boastful lyric lies a generation caught between fame and fear. And as one detective quietly put it after the verdict, he rapped about taking risks. In the end, he took the one that cost everything. Because no rhyme born from hatred ever silences the sound of grief that follows. CB's case showed how old crimes can resurface through modern forensics. Yet the next story isn't about gangs or turf wars, it's about betrayal. A friendship destroyed by envy, a dream poisoned by obsession. And the man behind it all, a rapper named Topz. Sixth offender, Renai Topz Belle, 30 years old. Leighton, East London, July 2024. A barbershop on Lea Bridge Road should have been a place of laughter, music, and weekend chatter. Instead, it became the scene of one of London's most senseless and shocking killings, a murder committed in broad daylight, witnessed by a child. The killer was Renai Belle, known in the underground rap scene as Topz. He was 30 years old, restless, and burning with resentment. Once described as an aspiring rapper with ambition but no discipline, Belle had already amassed 55 prior convictions by the time of the attack, for robbery, assault, and possession of knives. His life had been shaped by abandonment and violence, placed in care at 15, moving from hostel to hostel, and later drifting into the shadows of North London's street culture. But this time, it wasn't about gangs or territory, it was personal. His victim, Josh McKay, was more than a friend. He was a benefactor, a charity worker who had given Belle food, money, and a place to stay after his release from prison. Yet when McKay refused to fund a £1,500 rap video Belle believed would launch his music career, something dark ignited inside him. Weeks before the murder, Renai Topz Belle released a rap video with the chilling lyric, "I pray every day that I buck JMK, Josh McKay's initials." On July 6, 2024, Belle saw McKay entering Hollywood Cuts in Layton with his young son. He left, called his ex-girlfriend Tenica Parker, and collected a knife and mask. Minutes later, he returned, stormed inside, and stabbed McKay in the neck at point-blank range. Blood hit the mirrors as the boy screamed. McKay staggered outside and collapsed. Belle fled with Parker, who helped him clean up. Arrested 2 days later, Belle claimed self-defense, a claim the jury rejected entirely. Throughout the 5-week trial, Belle sat impassively. Gone was the swagger of Topz, the rapper who once boasted about fighting for respect. What remained was a man defined by rage, watching as his world collapsed under the weight of his own choices. When the verdict was read, guilty of murder and possession of a knife, he showed no emotion. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 28 years before parole. In a devastating victim impact statement, Bash Kahinda, McKay's mother, addressed Belle directly. "You killed my son in cold blood, in front of his child. You broke our family into 1,000,000 pieces. There is a special place in hell for people like you." McKay's partner, Shanice Thomas Brown, described how their children were forced to understand death before they even understood life. The killing resonated far beyond Layton. Online, the case was widely discussed under hashtags like Justice for Josh and Stop Knife Crime, though McKay's mother objected to that phrase. "Call it what it is," she said. "It wasn't knife crime, it was murder." Her words sparked national debate over how media language can dilute responsibility. Belle's YouTube channel was shut down, his music deleted. For many, he became the embodiment of a tragic pattern, the intersection of ego, poverty, and fame-chasing in London's drill culture. Today, he sits in a cell, stripped of his stage name and his freedom, serving a sentence that will keep him behind bars until his late 50s. And perhaps the cruelest irony is this: the fame Belle so desperately wanted finally arrived, not through music, but through the story of how envy silenced the very hand that once helped him. Because in the end, no verse, no beat, and no ambition can ever drown out the silence left by a life taken in vain. Just when it seemed London had seen every kind of tragedy, one final story would prove that revenge still ruled its streets. A gang boss turned rapper, a feud reignited, and a single moment that silenced a man and shook Britain's grime legacy. This is Courtney Ellis, known on the streets as Jazzy. Final offender, Courtney Ellis, Jazzy, 29 years old. Wembley, northwest London, July 5, 2019. The sun had just begun to set over the busy streets of Wembley when a man stepped out of a fast food restaurant, waiting for his meal. Within seconds, gunfire shattered the evening calm, 2 shots, fired from less than a meter away. When the smoke cleared, Craig Small, known in the local rap scene as Smalls, lay dying on the pavement. The murder was part of a long-running feud between the Church Road Soldiers and the Stonebridge Crew, rival gangs infamous in northwest London. Behind the wheel of the getaway car was Courtney Ellis, known as Jazzy, the Church Road boss and close associate of rapper Nines. Once respected in Brent's underground scene, Ellis had blurred the line between fame and violence. Prosecutors called the murder a carefully choreographed execution. Driving a stolen blue Mini with false plates, Ellis stopped as a masked gunman stepped out and fired twice at Craig Small. One bullet pierced his face and brain. He died instantly. 7 minutes later, Ellis drove the same gunman to Bridge Road, where they targeted another man, Serge Mukendi, known as Big French, a musician linked to the same rival faction. The gun jammed, sparing Mukendi's life. Moments later, Ellis and the shooter abandoned the Mini and fled in a pre-arranged black Volvo, aided by an accomplice, Christopher Kie, who later disposed of the car. For months, police struggled to piece together what had happened. It was only through an exhaustive analysis of CCTV footage, unregistered phone data, and forensic mapping that detectives were able to trace the movements of Ellis and his associates. Investigators described the case as one of the most complex gang homicide probes in years. When Ellis was finally brought before the Old Bailey in early 2024, he maintained his innocence. He denied being part of the killing, insisting he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the jury saw otherwise. Prosecutors argued he was a willing participant in a joint enterprise, the getaway driver who ensured the assassin could strike and vanish without a trace. During sentencing, Judge Lynn Taton KC described the act as an execution in public view, fueled by rivalry, revenge, and ego. Ellis was given life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years before parole. In the courtroom, Carol Campbell, Craig Small's mother, spoke through tears. "My son was a peacemaker. He had 3 children who adored him. His death has destroyed what's left of our family." Her grief deepened when, months later, a leaked YouTube video showed police officers joking about the murder inside a station. The footage went viral, sparking outrage and a formal misconduct investigation. Campbell described watching it as reliving the moment my son was killed, only this time, it was mocked. The case ignited national debate around gang culture, police accountability, and the blurred line between music and street life. Ellis's conviction also rippled through the UK grime community, where many questioned how fame, money, and status had become entwined with violence. The investigation left Londoners with stark reminders about survival in a city where rivalry can turn deadly in seconds. First, never underestimate how far wounded pride can drive revenge. Second, understand that loyalty, when rooted in fear, destroys more than it protects. And third, in a digital age, nothing stays hidden. Every message, call, and move becomes evidence. Today, Ellis sits behind bars, stripped of his power and persona. The name Jazzy, once shouted in clubs and on tracks, now echoes only in court transcripts. As one detective quietly reflected outside the Old Bailey, for every trigger pulled, there's a chain of lives forever broken. And in the end, the tragedy of Craig Small's murder stands as a grim truth. In the war for respect, no one ever truly wins. As the final bars fade, and the headlines turn to silence, one question remains: how many more stories like these are waiting beneath Britain's streets? Behind every beat, every lyric, and every promise of fame, there's a line between art and reality. And once it's crossed, there's no going back. From chart-topping tracks to life sentences, these are not just tales of crime, they're the true cost of pride, power, and the pursuit of respect. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure you subscribe to UK Real Crime and turn on the notification bell, because the next case we uncover may be even darker, even closer to home. Until then, stay alert, stay curious, and remember, every fame has its shadow.